Cool. So, since you have a lot of stuff, maybe we get started and then people can still roll in.
Sure thing. Okay.
Cool. So for those who haven't been here before, this is Jacob. So he went to Ithaca, graduated last year, and didn't get to finish his thesis during the semester. And it's not all because of COVID. It's because he took on too much.
Yeah.
And
But
you're
also,
going to hear all about it.
but also taking on too much kind of saved me because it's all like visual effects. So I would never have been able to do it without that at all, because that would have been impossible. So, okay. So let me get started here because I got a lot of crap I want to say. So let me share my screen.
I'm just going to add, feel free to jump in. He's going to have his screen share up for a lot of it, but if you have questions, just ask.
Is my screen sharing right now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my film. Interrupt me if you want, because I might not be aware if I'm just kind of droning on. So I'm going to talk about my film, which is called Remember Me in Therapy. These are some posters I made originally. And I'm just going to talk. So here's a log line of the film just to start out. It's a sci-fi comedy where a man named George and his newfound friend, an alien therapist named Ruben, trace back the past day in George's life to figure out why the Earth has blown up and why he's now stuck in a simulation of the destroyed planet. So you can imagine there's a lot of VFX potential there. So let me just talk about pre-planning. So getting started for posts or any project, it's a good idea to make an inventory of everything your project needs, to make a list, really, like I did here. For me, it was a lot of actual filmmaking stuff because it wasn't just VFX, but I made, like you'd make a more specific VFX list, but of like what programs you're going to use, what assets you have, what assets you need, what 3D stuff you need, and then you make a budget and all that stuff. But sorry, sometimes you don't know what you need, and how can you make a schedule if you don't know how long something's going to take, and you don't know what you need, and how long it's going to take, how to get it, and what to do once you have it. So if you're asking those questions like I was, then here's a good start for you. Get reference of things that look like the thing you want to do. Get reference for the aesthetic you're going for the technical things you want to do, get reference for everything so you can put a word to what you want something to look like. The goal for me kind of ended up being just sort of as good as it can look, but it's better to be precise and get reference footage of things that look like and content-wise are similar to what you're trying to do. For me, I had a character that looks like Mike Wazowski, so I looked at a lot of pictures of Mike Wazowski. And I'm going for that kind of cheap 3D look a little bit. Jimmy Neutron, I would say, was an inspiration. And there's just like there's a lot of stuff, and it's easier if you can put it into words what you want to do. Because if you just are like, I want something kind of like this, but a little bit maybe like that, and it's better than if you have no idea what you're doing. So also ask people who know more than you. I reached out to a lot of teachers. I reached out to Shayna. I reached out to Brad, who's the 3D and VFX teacher at IC, and that was extremely helpful. I could not have done anything without their help. And also, I reached out to a lot of people who do tutorials online. You think you could just watch it and then it's over, but if you talk to those people, they'll give you more specific information. So that's a really good idea. I reached out to a dude who's literally like famous in the VFX industry, and he answered me and gave me a personal Skype session where he showed me how to do something. So you'd be really surprised by who's going to help you. And then another big thing is don't be afraid to just do everything in After Effects, because After Effects can do a lot of things. There's a lot of programs when you're looking into them that have a lot of specific functionality. And really, like, it's best to be the most efficient as you can be and use each program to its own uses. But sometimes you kind of just got to go with what you have. So you've got to acknowledge if you want to learn a lot of new software and new techniques, or you kind of trying to dampen that curve as much as possible. So basically, once you kind of know what you want things to look like, look in the programs, see what they do, and then kind of figure out what's going to work best for you. And, learning programs through lynda.com was something that really helped me out. They've got tools for they've got tutorials for like basically everything. So once you know what program you're using, it's time to do tests in that program. I did a lot of tests because I was doing a lot of stuff on green screens, and I was going to be compositing a lot of characters into CG environments. So I did tests at the cyclorama downtown, and then I worked on staging those shots in Maya and putting them into the scene. So really, once you know what you want to do tests of it so you can see what you're going to get, how long it's going to take, and how hard it's going to be to do. Because that's something that if you just go into something blind, it's not going to be as easy. So a big thing is understanding the large things you want to do, doing tests of them, and yeah, that's important. So you want to prepare for like the big things you're going to do, because like you could get from like 0 to 50% in a month, and then it could take you another 3 months just to get another 1% of the film done, depending on what you're doing. So you kind of want to remember, like, something I wish I had really thought more about was like the diminishing returns on a project. So like once you work to a certain point and you like work for like a while and you got like 75% of the film done, it's going to take you like 5 times that amount of time to get the remaining like 25% done. And once you're getting like so little done that it's like not making a difference to you over a huge period of time, then it's probably time to just like stop working, which is what I kind of wish I would do, is just stop, not continue. But you know, you gotta find your limits. So ultimately, it's a lot of little things that go into a project, but sometimes you gotta just say, fuck it, I want to finish this, and I'm just gonna do everything in After Effects, and then it's gonna be fine. Because you know, trying to learn a billion programs is one thing, but sometimes you want to just finish the project also. So those are things to take into account. And now I'll try to get into the specifics of what I did. That was just some general notes, because I wish I had kind of researched more before I worked on stuff and thought more about it before going into it. So I just want to share that. If anyone has any like of their own anecdotes they want to say before I get started into like specific stuff that I did VFX wise, feel free to comment, because what anyone does is not necessarily what you should do. So it's just my experience. Anybody?
I think
Okay.
I'm just going to say that, so you knew After Effects, you worked on After Effects. You could have taken the easy way and just worked with that, but you didn't. So I assume you're going to go into why you wanted to learn Nuke, but
exactly. I will. Yeah, I will be, because like I'm just saying that because I kind of like at the same time that I did a lot of work, I feel like it's also just like taking me so long that I want to just like start out by saying you don't necessarily need to do all these things, but yeah. So I'll go into the specifics of why I used a lot more complicated programs and what I was specifically doing in those programs. So specifically, I was shooting on a green screen. That was the first big thing that I did. And the thing about green screens is that there's a lot of things that can make it better for you in post, or there's things that can make it a lot harder for you. So I'm going to go over some of the rules kind of for shooting on a green screen. And then you can kind of look at my shots and kind of judge it based on if I really kind of followed those rules or not. So, and I didn't all the time, and I made it a lot more difficult for myself. But so ultimately, with a green screen, the most important thing to remember is lighting. You want uniform lighting across the green screen, and you want the subject to be separated from that lighting and lit for the background they're going to be composited into. You want them to be as separated as possible from the green screen, and you want as flat a green screen as possible. You can see that in the top left shot there, that is a very, there's a lot of different green colors going on there, and that made things a lot harder. In the shot in the bottom left, you can see that there's a pretty solid green screen behind him. And I'll go into why the lights and stuff on the side of him don't really matter at all, because you can garbage math them out. But first, yeah, so lighting. Then the color of the green screen, you want that to be as close to the primary color as possible. In this case, green. I'll just go into why green's like good, because green has the lowest noise content of all the other color channels, and it contains the most luminosity. which is the most like lightness information, and it doesn't show up much on skin naturally. So it's really good for keying, and that's why green is chosen a lot of the time. Another thing with keying is like the distance from the green screen. You want the subject to be like as separated as possible from the green screen, as far away as possible. Like 10 or more feet is best. You can see he's sitting on the ground sometimes, and that's not ideal, but to get shadows and to get those wide shots, I had to have him sit on the ground sometimes. That made things a lot harder in post because I had to really kind of work to get him off the ground there. Yeah, another big thing is camera settings. You want to have the ISO and the gain like as low as possible to reduce the noise as low as possible, also getting enough light in the camera. And you also want to make sure you turn off camera sharpening, which is something I did not do because it creates these like artificial contrast in the edges of the person. And when you have that, it makes it like, it just breaks the keyer. I don't know how to describe it really, but like when you have camera sharpening on, it really messes things up. So don't do that.
What camera did you use?
I used the Ursa Mini that shot 4.6K. So that was a really good camera to use, except I just kind of messed up on the settings a little bit. Like it would have been better if I had not had camera sharpening on, if I'd shot a higher compression. I shot at 422, and 422 is fine. I mean, these things are like, you can, if you have a good lighting, you can pick out a key from something relatively well usually. But like if you shoot 444, you're getting all of the color information, whereas 422, you're getting all, basically 444 means that you're getting, for every 4 pixels, you're getting all of the color and all of the luminance. With 422, you're getting all of the luminance, but only half of the color information. And you're keying based off the color, the chroma. So you want as much color as possible, ideally. It takes up more space, but it's better. So for keying, I use Nuke because of the complexity in my shadows and the difficulty with the actor's hair. It was very frizzy, and because I had the sharpening on, which made the edges really bad, and because the green screen was relatively uneven, because the lighting kind of, you can see kind of spotlights on the floor, and then there's this like gradient to the edges, and there's this like the actual like cyclorama, which is the wall, is pretty flat, but the floor was a big problem. And really, like, I could have gotten like okay keys in After Effects, but they would have been really like, they wouldn't have even really been okay, honestly, for what I'm doing. Like, it would have just not looked good because it's just, the keys were pretty bad in some ways. So Nuke is what I went with, and there's a big learning curve with Nuke, and I'm glad I did it for sure. It's just like, I could have, it took a lot longer. So basically, Nuke has 4 keyers. It's the industry standard for compositing, and keying in it is a lot more precise, I would say, than any other program that I know. Well, maybe, I don't know, I've never used Fusion. I know like After Effects is like not as good. It has, but After Effects has key light, and key lights are really like powerful keyer, and Nuke also has key light. Nuke just also has 3 other keyers as well. So the thing about Nuke is that it's really good for a multifaceted approach to keying. That means you're keying things in parallel. You're not just, you're keying the body, you're keying like the head, and a lot of the time to get a good key, you got to key different parts separately. And Nuke is really good for parallel processing of things. And that's a big thing I'll talk about as I go on. And for keying, you'll often need, you'll need to put together like the final alpha that you're pulling from the key, and you'll need to put it together in a lot of different pieces. So a lot of this has to do with, like, I'm going to be saying the word alpha a lot, and if you don't know what that is, it's probably because you don't always need to use one. Not all images have an alpha channel. A typical JPEG image you see on the internet doesn't contain an alpha channel, and if one was created for it, it would just have a value of 1 everywhere. It would just be nothing's transparent. Like, transparency is denoted in alpha channel by having values below 1. So when you're compositing and say you want to put a person on a background, you need an alpha channel for that person, because there's no image format that will just be stored as the shape of a person. So all image formats are rectangles, to my knowledge, and that's why a PNG, if it's like, say, a ball and it's a circle, the ball is a circle, it's still going to have a pixel resolution that's square. So you can think about it like a normal rectangular image, except it has an extra channel embedded in it, which functions as like a cookie cutter. And so it'll just like punch out that image for you, and that's what you're seeing using that alpha channel. So if that makes sense. If anyone has questions about what an alpha channel is, that's pretty relevant to everything I'm going to say. So if anyone has questions about what that is, please ask me. No?
What is an alpha channel?
Okay. So an alpha channel, well, like, I mean, I'll try to make it like simpler. It's just like, if like, it's like, say in a program, if you cut out, like, if you're in Photoshop and you cut out a piece of an image, you're basically manually creating an alpha channel for that image. Like if you have a thing in an image, like a person, and you like slowly like trace them out, you're basically like making that, and then you like get rid of everything around him and you just keep that. You're basically making an alpha channel, and that is the alpha channel, that thing you cut out. So an alpha channel just determines what has transparency. It's not like when you cut something out, everything else is just like gone in the image file itself. It's denoted as being transparent. There's nothing that's showing in the color channels for that thing. Does that make sense?
Sorry, I was looking for a microphone. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good,
All right.
succinct explanation. Thank you.
Okay, hopefully it is. I'll try to like not be too technical about things. So I've realized about Nuke is that it's very image centric, and you have the image and you tear it apart and you use like every piece of it and you bring it all together at the end, and it's very precise. And you're taking an image through a lot of parallel processing. It's like, imagine like a river flowing through a bunch of tributaries, all coming into an ocean. It's like, there's just like, it starts at one central point and you break it up through a lot of like streams. They're called like pipelines. And that's kind of how visually Nuke looks. So let me just go through a script as quickly as possible, just to kind of show you visually how these things are working. So this is a Nuke script that's pretty simple. It's a pretty like bare bones key of something. Basically, you're starting with some footage, you denoise it because you want it to be, you don't want a lot of noise. It contaminates the green screen and the people. It makes it harder. So it's like adding a little bit of a blur, so it's a little softer. And then what you're going to do is, a lot of the time you're going to do one pipeline going off that for a despill, and then you're going to do another pipeline where you're actually keying. And what that does is that you're separating the original footage so that you can deal with the image and color correct and stuff separately from the actual key you're taking from it. And that's kind of like fundamentally the kind of thing you're doing in Nuke, is you're doing different things to the same image in different places. So when you're, this is a good representation of like a key that you'll often have to do, where you have one key like this, let's say it's the IBK here, that's doing like a body key of the person, and then you have another key that's keying the hair. And then you're bringing those together, you're key mixing them together, which is what the node is, one of the nodes that you can use to combine keys. And then you have a full key. So first you have like an image, and then you got to pull the alpha from it. So you find a key that's really toned for the body, where the color of the green screen behind it is a certain thing. And then you find an area that's great for the hair. It might be a little bit softer or something, because hair is a little bit, you don't want a chunky key. You want something pretty soft in the hair sometimes. And then you want to bring that together for the final alpha that you're pulling from the image. And then you're going to take that alpha and you're going to copy it back onto the original image. So it's like what I was talking about before, like cookie cutting something. You have the image, and then you pull the key from it, which is you get that alpha that you want, you cut it out. I want this person, I don't want this green around them. And then you take that and you stamp it onto the image. And then so this is using a copy node. And then you copy the alpha from the keyer onto the image. And I'll go into what despill is also a little bit in just a tad.
I was just about to ask, so thank you.
Yes, despill. I can just briefly say right now, there's a lot of green that gets on the person when they're in front of a green screen. And that green, it spills onto the character. So you need to do some things with color correction to the character, and you want to do that separately from the keying. You could do it before the keying, but it's best to do that separately. So I'll show an example of actually what despill looks like in a second. How am I doing on time right now? What time is it?
You're good. You got 10 minutes.
Okay.
I'm just gonna say, hold on this. So for those who took VFX with me, this copy alpha thing, remember the TV lab that we did? This is like using the bitmap to put it into the merge to just do, pull the key without doing any color correction or despilling. So that's what that is.
Yeah. So hopefully I'm not just sounding like I'm just speaking at people, but hopefully that makes some sense, because that's really like central to a lot of VFX work and a lot of keying, is like taking things apart in pieces and putting them back together at the end. That's kind of the whole theme here. So like you take the alpha, you cut it out of the footage, and then what you have to do, there's certain technical things you should understand, like you apply pre-multiplication that kind of bakes the alpha into the image. And there's certain technical things that you should understand before you go into a program like Nuke, which is why it made it difficult for me. But then, so then you take that, you have your keyed footage, you have the alpha cut out, and you merge that back on to the background, and then you have the key. So that's kind of how that works. And then it can get really complicated, and you can see here, this is one of my actual scripts, which is just like this never-ending graph of nodes and lines, and it's horrible. And it's taken me a long time to learn how to understand what that means. So, but it's really cool at the end when you actually understand it, and it looks like really nice, but it's painful sometimes to learn these
The other thing I'll say is that most people just try to use one key for everything. And that's where it gets frustrating, that they're like, oh, the body's pulling really nicely, but the motion blur is not, or the hair is not. And then they don't understand that you have to do different shapes for different parts of the body. And so that's what Jacob and I had talked about. I don't know when.
Oh yeah,
Right?
yeah.
February? A year ago?
It was like, yeah, this is the first thing you ever told me about keying, which I did not understand at all really at first. So it's not an easy thing to understand necessarily, that you're like taking the alpha and then putting it back on the image. You're like splitting them up. You'd think you would just put it all through one thing and then it's over. But it's really about like, that's why you can always like tweak things. You can always like, you could use 10 programs and you could do everything you need to in those 10 programs, and you could do it perfectly in those things, what they're built for. Like you do VFX in this program, you do comping in this program, you do 3D in this program, and you kind of structure things. And in Nuke, like you do a thing for this part of the image, you do a key for this part, and you can keep getting really specific. And it's important to understand when like it's as good as you want it to be. So
that's the difference between After Effects and Nuke and Fusion. So After Effects is like a one button, you get what you get, you're kind of stuck with it. It's hard to break it apart.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about After Effects, because After Effects is more artist friendly, I would say. And it's the kind of thing where it's more kind of creation based. A lot of the time you end up with something that's not necessarily what you started with. And there's a lot of cool effects, and you have a lot of things right at your disposal for you to do. Like in After Effects, you can just apply weird effects to things, and you can just like, it's right there. In Nuke, you would have to just like build these effects yourself, but you can just do well, some things are there, but you can like apply effects things, and the UI is simple where images are stacked on top of another. And that's different than like having to manually merge them together. So there's certain things about After Effects that are certainly more easy to understand immediately. But the thing with After Effects is that there is a limit to how much parallel things you can be doing for it to look like cohesive. It's hard to visualize. Sometimes you want that visual, like of I'm running this thing through this thing to get this thing. In After Effects, it's not as easy to track that path, whereas Nuke, it's all about that path. That's the whole interface, is that path. So one thing I used After Effects for was my title sequence, because that's a really good thing for After Effects, is motion graphics. It's really clear to mask things out in After Effects. Sometimes with rotos in Nuke, I'm confused about what like the roto node is like doing sometimes and how to make it work for what I want to do. So masking things out is really easy in After Effects. And usually there's a clear-cut way to do stuff with like type and motion graphics, just like moving things around and stacking things on top of each other. And so like, yeah, so I made, so like for this, I wanted the type to reveal itself and I wanted this logo to pop in at the end. In Nuke, I would have had to do all kinds of stuff to make that happen. In After Effects, there's an effect called stroke, and I was very immediately able to make this text write out itself by drawing a mask path through it, and then animate this logo to pop in. And I'm just gonna, so this is, yeah, this is a mask around the type. I'm just gonna show you how that turned out. This is the only video I'm probably gonna show, and this is my title sequence. It might be a little choppy from your end, but like something like this, that's super easy in After Effects, easier than Nuke, I would say, to do something just like reveal the text, and then this thing pops in, put a little glow on it, animate the glow, give it a little stretch and squash, and then like you're good. So that's cool. Get out of here. So now I'm going to talk about spill a little bit. Keying is all about the edges and despill. Spill is all the green from the green screen that bleeds onto the actor. And that's like, so spill, okay, so spilled, unspilled, spilled, unspilled, spill, unspill. So basically you're taking all the green out. And that's why you'd want to do this separately from keying. You could do this after you key, but you can't do this before you key. So like the idea of taking an image and despilling it separately from keying is because you're taking all the green out. And that is not complementary to keying something. You need the green, obviously. So for keying, you want the green there, so you do the keying down that pipeline. And then for the despill, where you're color correcting and stuff, you don't want to be doing that with the keying, so you do that in a separate pipeline. So yeah, spill, despill. Yeah, yeah, it's a good thing to separate from keying. That's a good example. And as far as keying itself, it's not difficult to get a core mat, which is what's inside the character, but it's hard to get the edges. The core itself is just, you can take a rough key and erode it inward, because the inside core mat doesn't reach the edge of the subject. So you can really slam the threshold of the key. You can get a really like, just, it's all just like a opaque, is opaque. It's like, it's just, you get the clean alpha channel from it and you can just slam it and you don't have to worry about the edges. And you can see here that like this is the core mat, and you don't have those edges that you have on this. This is a little rough and there's a blur, just ignore that. But like you can see there's like edges here, there's not edges there. So one of the big things you'd split up in keying is you would take a core mat and you would take an edge mat. So like you would get the core mat pretty easily, and then you'd have a lot of work to do on the edges. So yeah, so that's something you would split up into two different keys a lot of the time, core mat and edge mat. It's a big thing. And my edges were like really shit a lot of the time, which is why I had to use Nuke a lot of the time, because I had to key many different parts of the body separately. And
This is what an alpha looks like.
Oh yeah, wait, yeah, that's an alpha. This is an alpha channel. I'm gonna talk about an alpha channel in like 2 seconds, pretty specifically, with talking about compositing. This is what an alpha channel looks like. This is the cutout of the person. And sometimes you'll like sometimes if you're really getting into it, like there's ways of like what this is called an additive, and I won't get into that because it's really complicated and I don't even really understand it. But sometimes you're gonna like what this is, this thing is picking up such soft like color that the green screen is missing through a lot of like operations you're doing inside Nuke to get these like this really like soft like color from the original character. And so keying a lot of the time is about kind of it's about kind of putting increasingly softer alphas on top of each other until you get what you want. It's like you take like a hardcore mat and you take edges and you kind of keep like putting softer and softer things on there until you get something that's like usable for you. Yeah. So sometimes, oh yeah, this is like the final shot. So let's say core plus edges plus additive, which you don't need to do. It's like, I'm not even going to that. I don't even understand it really. Equals image. So yeah. And then sometimes sometimes you're keying and you're like, wait a second, this is all rotoing because my key sucks. So that happened to me a lot of the time, where the legs of the character were really like hard to key. So I had to actually roto parts of it. So like I went into Mocha, which is a program that's really good for tracking. And that's another thing. I could have tracked in Nuke, but I tracked in Mocha because it's more efficient and it's better at it. And I had it and it wasn't that hard to learn. So I basically, you draw these masks around these different parts of the character that you want to track, you track it, and then you roto that out so that you're manually picking out that alpha. You don't need to just use the keyer because the keyer is not working for you. Sometimes that happens. A lot of the time in the industry, they're rotoing a lot of stuff because it's just like, I'm just going to pay this person $1 an hour and they're going to roto everything for me. And it's kind of like sometimes easier than really going into technical stuff and keying something, so it's like, you want to do the least amount of roto you can though, because it sucks. But there's a strategy to it. There's a strategy to rotoing. It's not just brute force. You want to kind of move as few rotos as possible. You want to kind of like, if you're moving a roto around, you want to move the whole roto. You don't want to just move each little vertex of the roto, because then you're going to get a lot of fizzing. But I won't talk about that too much. So I want to talk about just the last thing about compositing I want to talk about is just like, what is compositing at its most basic? What does compositing mean? So the most basic thing about compositing is to merge two images together using an over node in Nuke, and it would just be a normal blending mode, and After Effects is putting an image on top of another. Generally, like A plus B times 1 minus A, that's the math to it, is the most simple form of the math for compositing two images, and I label it here for you. So B is the background, A is the foreground, lowercase a is the alpha, and then the confusing part is what does B times 1 minus A mean? And all that means is that you're taking the inverse of this alpha and you're putting it on top of the background. And all that means is that I'm saying I'm going to punch out the hole in the background where this character is going to go. So that's all that means. So when you add basically B times 1 minus A plus A, you get that. And I know that's kind of, a lot of people don't like math, but understanding that made me really feel more integrated in the process of keying and compositing. And like before, I just didn't understand what was going on. But if you understand just like what's going on behind the scenes, especially in Nuke, it can really help you. So just like understanding that in any program you use, when you composite two images over the top of each other, it's not just magic. It's not just like pieces of cardboard. The program has to punch out a hole in the background and add the image on top of it. That's kind of the basics of it. And then there's a lot of other blending modes and stuff to understand, but that's kind of what it all stems from. So yeah, in Nuke, there's a lot of things to understand, like understanding something like this, understanding what pre-multiplication means, understanding what linear color spaces entail, understanding what all the different merge and channel merge and shuffle and all these nodes do, that's kind of a lot of the step up that comes with Nuke. So yeah, and now that's kind of everything I want to talk about with compositing. Is anybody actually interested in me explaining like this if they didn't understand like what this math means? Or otherwise I was going to go on to Maya, but does anyone want to talk about compositing at all? Or share their experience of compositing? Or is anyone bored by what I'm saying and they want to talk about something else or something? No. Okay. Well, yeah. So that helps me to understand that kind of stuff, because otherwise it just seems like kind of unattainable unless I can understand these little things that go into like what are blending modes. Because then once you understand like what blending modes are in like After Effects or Photoshop, then it's like, oh, if this, like for example, I was trying to put a crack on the ground and I had a crack on the ground, a photo stock element of it, and it was a concrete crack on the ground. I'm like, there's no way I can make this ground, which is grass, look cracked using this photo element, which is of concrete. But if you multiply that photo element, which is concrete, if you use like a multiplication blending mode, then all of a sudden it'll work, because like the math of it is that you're multiplying the, like, I don't want to get too into it, but it's just like there's certain blending modes that go beyond just putting one image on top of another. So understanding that kind of stuff and what multiply and what subtract do, what difference is, like with a clean plate in keying, when you have just the clean background, and then you do like, that's what a clean plate is. And then you have a character. So let's say you have a shot of the background, and then you also have a shot of the character on the background that you're going to key. So then what you can do is, then if you just do a difference math operation between those two, what you have is the character. The difference between a clean background and a character in front of the green screen is just the character. So those are the kinds of things that you understand. It's like, oh, I can kind of like, I'm almost like kind of like doing workarounds in the program by understanding how these things work, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah. So the next thing, the last thing I want to talk about is Maya. Okay, so maybe there's some 3D people who care way more about Maya than they do about keying. So Autodesk Maya, what is that? If you use Autodesk Maya, you're gonna have a bad time. Not true, that's just a joke. I really like Maya, but it's really confusing sometimes. So Maya is really one of the most complex and most rewarding softwares I've used. Really, like a whole world can be created from the ground up, and most 3D programs can do that. So if you can get Maya for free, that's great because it's like the industry standard, but a lot of people use Blender because it's free, like whether you're a student or not. So don't use Maya if you, well, you know, like it depends. If you're trying to get a job in the industry, everyone uses Maya and Houdini and that kind of stuff. People don't use Blender because it's open source and there's no way for you to fix things using some company to fall back on because it's open source. So
some use Cinema for one of my studio.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
So it's either Max or Maya. Those are the two.
Yeah. But then like Houdini for like visual effects a lot of the time, right? Yeah. So I mean, it's all about like, there's so many things you can use, which is why the first thing I said was like, look into like what you want and look into like what these programs do best and try to figure it out from there. So you kind of have control of what you're doing. So the most important thing with 3D is like, what do you want to do in 3D? Because sometimes, I mean, you can do like a 3D text with a drop shadow. You can do that in After Effects. But if you want to like animate a character, build a scene, these kind of things are like a dedicated 3D program. And consolidating is, what is this? What is my next slide? I'm just going to leave this up for now. So consolidating is key in 3D, and it's best to do as much as you can in the comp and to get as many external assets and textures and stuff downloaded that you don't have to make. And then you're like, you're kind of like a set designer. Working in 3D can just be like, you're just like a set designer who knows how to use this program. And then, especially when you're building scenes, you don't have to be building things from the ground up. Although it's very rewarding to model, rig, animate, texture, and render from the ground up. It's cool to do that. So, in 3D for this project, I knew I wanted to have a character that I built from scratch, and I wanted to create several scenes. And that's kind of all I knew going in. And it took a lot of conversations between like me and Brad and just the internet and me to figure out how I was going to do that and what was the best way to do that. So I'll go over kind of the big things with my character that I made. So I made a character named Ruben Shapiro, and that was the alien character in my film. And I stole him entirely from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and from Mike Wazowski. So that's all you need to know about that. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to go into it more specifically. So when you build a character, a great thing to know is the world him or her or they or whoever is in. What is their environment? Because that's a big thing. Is like, what world are they operating in? What are they like? These are the questions, the theoretical questions that you should ask yourself. But like I said, I kind of just stole this character. I didn't think that much about it because I kind of just liked the way the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy's cover looked. But yeah, so that's kind of what you should think about before modeling character. So I knew it was just kind of like a hole in a circle with tubular arms. I got a lot more reference of Mike Wazowski, so I could really kind of steal that design. And so the first thing I did kind of was go into Maya and bring my reference drawings in and then model based off that. So it's just really like what looks good works. I mean, there's certain things like you should model for deformations, which is how the character is going to move. You want to model to make that as efficient as possible. So that's one thing to really consider going in, but just generally you set up the orthographic drawings. You want them to be as exact as you can in Maya or whatever program. and then you build it off that, and you build half of it. You don't have to build the whole thing, and then you mirror it over. That's the idea, is that you're working on half of it because you're going to get symmetry, and then you can get asymmetry other ways later on. So having the model be symmetrical is how you usually will go about that. So once the model is done, it's time to UV. And UVing is like, what UVing means is there's X, Y, and Z, and those coordinates, U and V, are their own spatial coordinates, and they determine how an object is going to be mapped how the textures are going to be mapped onto an object. So basically what that means is, like, you can see in this that I have the UV map here, and this is the UV map of this circular guy. So it's like a cereal box that you need to flatten out. You can't just stomp on it or just throw a texture at it and then it sticks. It's like you need to flatten it out like a piece of paper and then apply a flat image, a 2D image to it. You can model that image. You can like make that texture in a 3D program, but ultimately what you're doing is you're putting on a 2D image, you're projecting that onto a 3D object. And that's kind of a really annoying thing to do. So it's important to understand, at least for now, until things like p-text and stuff become the way to do things, which is a different way of UVing. But basically it's like you cut seams because you need to unwrap it, you need seams so that you can flatten it. So you cut seams where you're not really gonna like see the thing. You're not gonna see the seams because seams will like you can see this is a checkerboard representation of a texture map. If the texture map was a checkerboard, this is how it would look. So you can see that these seams here, it doesn't look continuous. And so you're trying to hide those, which is why I put them in the back of the character. Well, Brad put them in the back because he did this for me. Well, not did it for me. He told me how to do it. He explained it to me. I wouldn't have known how to do that. So so they're in the back. So that's the best place to put the seams. And then ultimately you're projecting a 2D texture onto that. And I started with this I didn't even UV at first because I just applied this preset. So guess what? You can skip like everything and just apply a preset. And then, whoa, it's done, actually. So, but no, I decided I was gonna do more. So I did UV the person, the guy, the thing, the alien. And then I made a much more detailed texture map. You can see this is much more detailed. There's these maps. These are the maps I used. There's a diffuse map, which is the flat color information, just flat color, no lighting. Then there's the specular map, and that says how the lighting is going to be reflected from the thing. So darker regions, they're not as reflective. Lighter regions on the map are more reflective. There's the normal map, and the normal map is going to show you how bumps are going to be on the surface. Like you instead of having to model little bumps, you put a map on, and it uses lighting strategies to make it look like there's a forward and back surface on there. So you're kind of breaking it up across the surface. Like here, it's flat. There's no breakup of the texture at all. It's just a color. Here, there's a lot of breakup of the color. You're trying to break up the thing to look more organic, if that's what you're going for. I didn't have to be going for that, but I went for that. So it took a lot longer. So yeah. Then I added, then I rigged the character. So I added joints and I added controllers to the character. And then basically the way that works is just like, it's like a file hierarchy. It's like, you can see on the bottom right, there's like the clavicle is, you go like the thumb is controlled by the thumb base, which is controlled by the thumb cup, which is controlled by the hand, which is controlled by the wrist, which is controlled by the elbow. So like a file, if you move the master file, you're moving the whole thing. If you move the shoulder, that's the master file. Let's say you're moving the whole arm. And you can get into reverse kinematics. Is that what it's, inverse kinematics. And then you're doing it differently. I'm not going to get into that because I didn't use that. So, but the rig would still be, this file, the way this looks is going to still be like the same. So I rigged it and then I applied these like controllers so I can move it around. I could have just animated on joints, but I added controllers to it because that made it better. And then a big thing that really kind of slowed me down was making sure these deformations were right, like in the shoulder. Because if you just let the deformations be how they're going to be, like that's what I was talking about, like modeling for deformations, they could look horrible. Like you can see here, here's what my original deformations looked like in the shoulder. They looked like chicken leg. And then here they look like a shoulder. So those are the kind of little things that I did that it's like, wow, this looks better than that. Maybe, depending on who you are. Maybe you like this because it looks weird. I don't know. But like this took a lot more time for sure. So really like it's like, it's better render settings, better lighting, better textures, tweaking things, better deformations, better blend shapes. Blend shapes are sliders that control pose. So you want like, if you want to smile, you're blending from, so you make a blend shape for a smile. So now you have what the character looks like when it's smiling. And then you have what the character looks like when it's frowning. And then you have a slider here, and then you blend from pose to pose. That's what a blend shape is basically. And I made a ton of blend shapes for the mouth and the shoulders and stuff to make them look better so that when the arm's up here, it blends well going into a downward position. So blend shapes are you actually create an identical model with a certain pose you want and you blend between them. That's not necessarily how you would animate the character. Like you wouldn't animate by making a blend shape from him being here to him being here, but that's how his deformations work. For animating, you would go key by key. This is how it's gonna look. So, well, I mean, technically, when you fill out, when you do like key poses, Maya is blending, whatever. I'll talk about animating a little bit. But so yeah, so this is what it looked like before, and this is what it looked like after. And like I said, it's like a lot of little things that go into making it, like breaking up a body to look better. There's a lot of things that, like little things. Yeah, so like it's now honestly the way the workflow that I used is analogous to kind of how you animate, which is when you animate, you do key pose to key pose. You're like going from like your main key pose is like he's like this, and then he's like that, and he's like that, or they're like this, and those are like the main poses you want. And then you get that done first, and now you have the big movements. And then you go in and you fill in the in-betweens. You fill in the breakdowns, and you fill in the extreme positions, and you want the arcs. And that's kind of how I approached this whole project, is like, the best thing to do from my perspective was to do all the big things and then go back later retroactively and kind of do the little things in between that really kind of make it go from like a B to like a B plus, or like a B to an A, or, you know, like really kind of that little extra step that's like all those little things that make it look more real and stuff. But the thing with CG is that everything kind of looks cool because it still has that like wow factor, and it's still like weirdly like retro and weird looking, and the simplest things can look cool. So it's not all about doing all this crap. Yeah. So the final thing I did in 3D was my scenes, and I'm just gonna just really briefly just like, it's a similar approach, like model, UV, then refine the lighting in the scenes. I downloaded a bunch of assets. Like I said, you can kind of just be like a set designer with CG stuff. And then break up the colors, which is the diffuse, break up the specularity. I'll show an example of that in a second. And yeah, so the scenes in a way are like, they can be easier than other things because you don't need to do it from the ground up a lot of the time. There's a website called Turbo Squid where you can like download a lot of assets, and you can kind of, you could make a scene just by downloading things. I mean, it costs money sometimes to get those things, but I did do a lot of advanced like texturing and stuff. Like, so here's a scene like before and after. Like you can see that I broke up a lot of the color on the wall. And like this is a lot flatter. You can see on the ground here, I added like a normal map to give it like, here's a good example of a normal map. On the bottom left, you can see these like bumpy things here. You can see how there's like a texture to the surface. In the right one, there isn't that. That's what a normal map and a displacement map will do for you. A displacement map is physically altering the mesh, whereas a normal map is simulating what that would look like through lighting. Normal map is less intense at render than a displacement map. But yeah, so that's an example of kind of refining something. These are some of my scenes. These are my other scenes that I made. And you can see that I really kind of like, the big thing which separated these from just being boxes with stuff in them was getting those like, getting the textures and the lighting to look good. The models look pretty good, but honestly, a lot of the models I downloaded. So it was a lot of like texturing and lighting. You can see here that like, this is what it looks like flat. This is what if you just stuck a color on a 3D model. If you just stuck like this red peachy color onto a 3D model, it's just going to be flat like this, and you don't do anything else, just flat. But then if in this picture, you can see that I broke it up. I broke up the diffuse channel, which is the flat color. I broke up the specular channel. You can see all this kind of breakup that's going on here. And you can see this looks a lot more realistic than this. And the same thing with this bathroom. I had this flat color here for the wall, and then I was like, I don't really like that, so I broke it up, and there's these like, it looks a lot more realistic when you kind of do that extra work on the texturing and breaking it up and making it look more organic, like it's been worn in, it look like it's used. You get that kind of eye for things by just looking around you. A lot of scene work is like looking at the world around you, looking at how things look, looking at really referencing scale of objects in the real world, looking at a corner and seeing that like it's a little bit like, it looks a little bit more worn there, and when things look more worn, they're a little bit lighter. And these kind of things, like if you think about them, like if you watch like a Pixar documentary about how they model things, they go into like, they're very specific about the story interacting with the materials in the story. So yeah, rendering in Arnold, I rendered with Arnold. That's about all I want to say. It took me a really long time because I wasn't really good at understanding how to render things. And I used a render farm. If anyone knows what that is, it's like you send all your work to a render farm, and they have 1,000 computers that do each of your frames once. So you do 1,000 computers, each doing, so you have 1,000 frames, you send them to a render farm, they have 1,000 computers, and each computer does one frame, and it takes you 10 minutes. If you did 1,000 frames on your computer, then it would take you 7 years. So that's how that goes. Like, I'm not, it's all about parallel, things working in parallel. If you just do everything in just a straight attack, then it's going to take longer and it's not as efficient. Yeah, I use
it's named after Arnold Schwarzenegger too, by the way.
Oh my God. Wow. Yeah. I thought this was a joke, but it's real. It's really him. Okay. Yeah, I use particles. Those are cool. Made some cool vomit, which is all weird and stuff. Now, the last thing I was going to talk about was just briefly like ProTools, because I think sound is as important as visuals. It just takes not as long. So I'm not going to talk about it as long, but I was going to talk about it briefly. Unless everyone's tired of this and wants to just like ask questions. I was just going to talk a little bit about audio.
I want to hear about audio.
Nice. So I'm going to talk about audio. Okay. So sound and music are not dissimilar from compositing. You're always working hard to get things to sit well while also drawing attention to what you want to stand out. So it's mixing. It's all about mixing things and what you want to focus on, what you don't want to focus on. Way off script here. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is parallel processing in audio, because that's like, it's more parallel processing. Like, it's all about efficiency. So in audio, a big thing that you're going to see when if you're seeing people who are professionals is they're not just having, let's say, I'm talking about music right now because that's what I was mixing for this, but this goes for anything. So if you have a guitar, you wouldn't just put reverb on the guitar. You would have the guitar, then you would make a track, another track, which is a send for the guitar, and you put reverb on that track. So then what you're doing is you're playing the guitar, and then you're sending that to a reverb track, and you're mixing those together. So what that's doing is giving you a lot more control, and that's what you want. You can see here that I have two guitars, and there's nothing on them, but they're being sent to a reverb, a compression, EQ. You wouldn't always be sending to like EQ and stuff, but it's the idea is there that you're parallel processing things. Yeah, so it's kind of destructive to not do that because then you don't have as much control. It's all compositing in music and film and everything. It's all about control, and you can always have more control, but you don't always have more time. So also control and time are kind of at odds with each other, is my experience. So a big thing with audio is understanding what EQ is. And I'm going to try to relate these things to film because I don't want audio to seem like it's a whole different thing, because it's not. It's all an image-sound relationship. It gets processed in your brain and combined, and they're related. So EQ is it's what you're controlling the different frequency ranges of a sound. And you can think of that like colors and contrast in an image. If everything was light blue in an image, it would be very challenging to make anything out of that image. So in audio, in an analogous way, you're kind of, you're creating contrast and separation so things can stand on their own planes. You're making things so you can have a sound that's higher, a sound that's lower, and if you have a bass, you might pull a lot of treble out of that bass. You might pull like everything above, like, well, you might have like a little, like you want to click or something, but like the idea is like if you have a bassy sound, you pull a lot of like the high out of it, so that stands on its own thing, and then you can have separation and contrast in a mix. That's important. You don't want everything just coming at you in its full frequency span. The thing about audio is compressing things and limiting things a lot of times what you want. With film, a lot of time you're trying to keep things like full resolution and everything. With audio, a lot of the time you're kind of limiting things. That's getting into like compression. I'll talk about it now because, yeah. So compression is like you want, in film, if everything was just straight the volume level that it was, then you would have to be riding the volume knob like the whole time you're watching something. So with compression, like especially with vocals, with dialogue, people have a lot of dynamic range in their voice. They're going from speaking loudly to speaking softly a lot. And you don't want to have to ride the volume. So you want to compress it so that you're keeping it at a certain level so that it's coming at you and you're not having to be like, wait, that part of the sentence was lower than this part. So that's kind of what compression is doing for you. You're creating a threshold, and then the ratio is describing how much, once this audio gets to this level of loudness, how much are you going to attenuate that? How much are you going to bring it down so that it's just like clamped to this level? So yeah, it's not analogous per se to film, video compression, because you're not losing things in a negative way. You're still losing information technically, but it's like with audio, sometimes you want to be losing some information because you're trying to control this frequency range, this audio level, this space. You're trying to have more control over it. You don't want it all over the place. You don't want just this muddy thing coming at you. So, and that's a big thing with reverb, is that reverb is analogous in many ways to film, in that in video, like it's like your depth. Like reverb is the depth of sound. So when you're in a video, like the blur is of the video. If everything was just flat, it wouldn't look like things have their own space in an image. So you want to have that like depth of field, and that's the same thing with audio. With reverb, you're giving a sound a depth of field. You're putting it back. It's forward and backward motion or space in a sound. So that's analogous sometimes to like what you would be doing visually, is you're trying to control that front to back depth, and panning left to right, that's controlling the left to right depth. I don't know any like top to bottom stuff. Maybe that's coming out in the future someday. So that's like, yeah, keep things in the green when you're mixing them. You do want to compress things, but you don't want to be out of control with your compression. You want to be in control. So mix things at a level where they're clean. Yeah. So I won't talk much more because I don't have any idea if this was interesting. So.
No, this is awesome.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
I really got a lot out of this.
Wait, so Jacob, what's the progress on your final right now?
Well, I've been almost done for the past 6 months. So
that's yeah, I feel like we keep seeing updates, and like, I mean, it's looking amazing, everything they've been showing, and like I'm just hyped for what it actually is like.
Yeah, thanks.
Fully ready to go.
I'm almost there. Like I've modeled everything, I've rendered everything, I animated everything. It's just a matter of the keying for me at this point, which is why I was like really frustrated when I was talking about keyings, because it's where I'm at right now. It's really like bothering me. So that's kind of where I am. If anyone wants to open the floor to talk about these things, feel free.
Do you want to stop screen sharing?
Yeah, sure.
I'm just curious, all this time you're saying everything's taking, how long is the final short going to be?
Oh yeah, it's 12 minutes long.
Okay.
So yeah, it's basically like a 12-minute long animated film with visual effects, it's a lot to take on for like one person. I wouldn't recommend that.
Right, it's just you're not sharing the work with anybody else.
Well, I'm like working with this dude a little bit on compositing, and obviously Brad was helping me a lot. I couldn't have done just like everything myself. Like that's why I was like, you got to reach out to a lot of people. But like
as he goes, so it's
what?
not like he's learning as he goes. So it's not like he knew everything and then is just doing it.
Yeah, but yeah, like I'm mostly like doing it, but I'm learning from other people while I'm doing it. So it's like physically I'm like doing everything, but it's like I'm also watching like a lot of tutorials and a lot of stuff and
Right.
getting help like people helping me, telling me how to do things and stuff. But yeah, mostly just like me. Yeah.
Cool.
And you started pre-pro when?
Well, I started testing things like a week into like the semester. So basically since like the end of February, basically, just like every day. Yeah. And I mean, I moved like linearly from like, I started with like After Effects and like trying to do everything kind of in that. And then obviously like Maya, like for the 3D stuff, but it's kind of moved on. Like you see like for tracking, I wasn't getting great results in Nuke. So I went to like Mocha and it's kind of expanded and expanded. But yeah.
I just have, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
So how far are you along in the process of like completing your film? Like you said, you've worked on it for a while. You're currently on the keying process.
Yeah, well, basically, yeah. Once I composite everything, it's done. Besides like some sound stuff I want to do, like I want to do a lot of mixing with sound, and I haven't really tackled that very much. But like visually, with the visual effects, it's done once I composite everything, which is what I'm doing right now. So I have all my elements. That's a lot of the problem is that's like I haven't seen the whole thing because it's all in pieces. So I'm kind of compositing everything right now, and then I'll be very close to done. Maybe like a month and a half.
So we can see it in December?
If you can't see it in December, you can't see me in December.
Yeah,
Thank you. That present was incredible.
Oh, you like the presentation? You're chopping.
Genuinely, sorry, I actually muted myself halfway through it. Really, really incredible. Well done.
Thank you.
Memes and everything.
Oh yeah, I include memes. I forgot.
Thank
Yeah.
Thank memes.
Genuinely, like the effects of what you were doing, like the way you, I was very impressed with when you showed like comparisons of like your old, like when you were doing like the basic layers stuff, like, you know, the typicals, you know, layers and like Maya and Arnold and all that stuff. And then you showed like your improvements on how you improve the textures of it, especially, you know, in the backgrounds and with that like CGI green character. I really think you did a good job. Like, like it clearly, like it was such a drastic improvement. And I can tell like from that, you worked really hard on getting this character right and stuff. And like, if you had shown me the first one, I might not have had that much of an issue with it, especially since you know, as a student film and such. But like, I can tell like you really worked hard to make something that looks really impressive, honestly. Like I haven't seen any footage of it yet, but I already can tell this looks incredible so far from what I've seen.
Thank you. Yeah. Big thing is just it could be done like whenever. Like that's like a big thing I wanted to just like point out. Is like I could have stopped like at any point like with it. So I'm glad it like looks cool. But yeah, it's like hard with these kind of things also. I think it's visually gonna be cool, but like I said, like when you're working like this, another thing that I wish I had done was have more like daily like things coming out where I'm like having a product at the end of like a day or a week or a month, or I'm having a full cut of like the film or something. Because that's another thing where it's like when you're working on something like this, you can get just lost in like working on it in pieces. And it's like people are like, what does this look like? And it's like, I don't know what it looks like, you know. So it's like you want to kind of have an idea of what the whole thing looks like. So that's another thing that I want to mention. But thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I have a question asking for two friends that are here. Do you recommend designing your character first before you create your story, or do you create your story and then design your character after you shoot and have an idea of all that?
Well, for me, like the first thing that literally came to my mind was like the character. Like that was the first thing with the whole film that came to my mind. So it's like a lot of things can like, do you mean like technically when you should start working on things, or do you mean like what do you mean? Like when I should start like Can you repeat the question?
So Jacob and Luke are in a group. We're having this issue. Do we design the character first and then build the story, or do we build the story and then design the character?
Well, I would say whatever you're more like passionate about, what you think you understand best, do first, because then that's going to be the basis for the next thing. So if you think you like understand the world and how that's operating, then I would say to go with that first and start that, because that's going to inform the character. And if you know the character more, start with that, because that will inform the world in a way. Because like it's, I guess, start with like what you know best and what you feel like you have the feel for best, because then either way that's going to give you ideas for the other thing, in my experience.
I just have one more question, actually. So you have been working on this project now for, I think, around, like, since I think you said February, so like a few months now. And, you know, you've been working hard on it. If you were to do this project again, what would you say was your big mistake, or like something you would redo if you could do this all over again? Or improve on?
I would definitely have more people working on it, and definitely like get other people to do specific things. Even if I had to start them for them, like sometimes people won't do things how you want, but it's better to like do like 50% of something and let someone finish something sometimes. Like you can like start it for them or something. So I would try to hand off things to other people, and also have more of a plan for how I want something to look finally, so that I wasn't just like, well, I could do more, like it's best to be like, oh, this is how I wanted it to be, so that's actually done. It's not supposed to look photoreal. It's supposed to look like that, actually. And also just have like daily things, like I said, like it's like I wish I could show things to people, because for all I know, like this film, when it's all done and put together, is just like not even good. Like, I mean, visually, like I think it's gonna look cool, but like content wise, like I think it's gonna be cool, but it's hard for me to tell because I haven't seen it. So it's like that's a big thing that I wish that I would have done, is have like cuts at least like every month of the progress of the film. But that's easier to do when you have a lot of people working on it. So yeah.
In this, you've taught yourself character animation, essentially, node-based compositing, keying, 3D fluids. Yeah, it's been, you've learned quite a lot in the past 6 months, I'd say.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was like coming from, is like you can either kind of go into something like, I'm going to tackle all these learning curves and I'm going to learn all this stuff, or you could be like, I want to dampen these learning curves. I want to learn specifically what I need to do and consolidate things. And I kind of did go that approach where I learned like a lot of different workflows, and I'm happy I did, but you know, there's like a give and a take with that kind of thing.
I was curious about the editing, because you were talking about kind of working parallelly. Do you cut the whole thing first with like just the guy talking to a tennis ball, or do you kind of do both at the same time, or fill it in any way? And like, how does that change once you have the character? Because I imagine once he's talking to the character, you know, you think like, oh, I want the character's eyes to move for a half second more before it goes back to him or something like that.
Yeah, so you're going to kind of always be making retroactive adjustments to things. You're always going to kind of be like, well, this is how I ideally imagined it, but I want to go back and kind of tweak this. But really what I did was edit the whole thing with a green screen, just green screen. It's kind of hard to not see the environment. But yeah, edited the whole thing. He's talking to a tennis ball. It's the green screen, and just did that. And then based everything I did off of that, based all my shots, all the angles of my shots, everything. I didn't like go into Maya and be like, this angle looks good in Maya. I'm going to try to make a shot that looks like this. I was like, I cut the film, and then I was like, this is what it's going to be. I made some retroactive things. I changed it a little bit. But that's another thing with sound, is that you want to have a picture lock for sound. So I kind of locked everything early on, so that would at least take some of the creative license I have later on. Because you want to take some of that creative license away, honestly. Like, I wanted to lock as much as I could early on. And that's something I would definitely recommend, because limitations are like, ultimately, it's about limitations, because when you decide to do something, that's a limitation. Like, that's a pure limit. That's like you're making a choice. So limiting the amount of choices you can make ultimately is something I would recommend. So yeah, I locked everything early on, edit-wise and sound, the picture lock-wise. Cool. Does that answer? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, yeah. Did you? But you said you made certain changes because I just imagine once you have the two characters talking to each other, like something it has to change a little bit. Or did you find that that original picture lock was pretty much what you?
Honestly, for the most part, like when if his eye line is good with the tennis ball, and even if it wasn't, I could move the character more easily than I could move him. So it's like once I lock it to that, matching the VFX to a shot is much more how you would do it than trying to match a shot to the VFX somehow. So it's like, yeah, I went retroactively in to fix some things later on that were like not exactly like this shot was giving me a lot of difficulties, let's say. So I was like, I'm gonna not do this shot. Sometimes you do that, but like when he's like talking to the character and all that, I mean, I had the Matt who was reading the lines there. I had the tennis ball there. He was looking at the tennis ball. He's a really good actor. He was reacting with the tennis ball. His lighting was matching the scene. So everything was kind of there already. And that's kind of a lot of pre-planning. You want to plan so that like you're lighting the subject for the scene. The tennis ball is matching. The eye lines are matching. That's a lot of on-set. Like that's why you get like that's another thing I wish I had was like a VFX man, like supervisor or something on set that could like watch some of that stuff. Because on set, I was also doing everything. I was like, is this working? Is that working? So it's like, that's another thing. It's just like, is trying to match everything the best you can really in the live action cut of the film is because from my understanding, that's how it usually goes when even on big productions is they throw it in the timeline and they edit everything together. And then most of the film is spent on VFX and they don't really change anything with the cut, right? I mean, I think that's pretty much how it goes. So is that what you mean? Like pretty much?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I've just I found like just working with two people, like up till soon before I think something's finished, I'll say to myself, oh, I want if it's a shot reverse shot, I'll think, oh, I want to see their face for 2 seconds more, and that'll be a decision I make, pretty close to when I'm done with something.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, like, if does that ever happen,
Yeah.
when you're working with a animated character?
Yeah, I guess that's what I meant by the little things. There were
Right.
some things
Okay.
like that where what you try to do is like keep it to the picture lock. So if you extend one shot, you want to retract from another shot the same amount so you can keep it on the picture lock.
Mm-hmm.
But like, yeah, like I would go in and I would be like, this effect shot is like one of my shots is like 3 seconds long for an effect shot. I'm like, you cannot possibly see what's going on in 3 seconds. So I made it 6 seconds long. And there's sometimes where you want to get like a longer reaction out of a character. Once you key a shot, if you extend that shot, it's not going to make it harder to key usually, unless in the last second of the shot they go like they start moving or like all this motion blur happens. So it's like usually you can kind of like you can change some things after the fact, which was what I was saying is kind of like the little things, I guess. But yeah, like there were definitely times when I would have to kind of lengthen some shots and shorten some shots to make them work better contextually for sure.
Cool.
You shot 4K, but was that just screen? Did you not work in? Did you finish in 4K?
Well, I'm basically like, I mean, I haven't really. The only thing I've really used the full like resolution of the 4K for like technically is for keying. Like I haven't needed like when I was using like when I was referencing the shots in like Maya and stuff for like getting the shot angles right and stuff. I was just exporting as like HD and stuff. So really like the 4.6, I said it was like 4.6K, and that was really mainly for the keying, and so I could do color correction better and stuff. So that's
you
like
basically did 4K, 4.6K, 422 instead of doing 444 HD.
well, I think I should have done 4.6K 444. Like that's what I think I should have done because I had the capacity to do that. And a big thing with that kind of thing is like a hard drive to really make sure like because I got this thing. This is a glyph. It's like a RAID configuration, so it's like crazy fast. So I would have been able to handle 4.6K 444. Like I would have been. I should have done that probably, but I think that 444 HD may have been better than 4.6K 422. I think that would have been. I think because the compression of the chroma kind of killed me a little bit. But really, most importantly of everything, I should have turned camera sharpening off. That was like the big thing that I should have done in camera wise that really messed me up.
Cool. Any other questions?
Does anyone want to share their experiences with this stuff? I guess
We are way over, Jacob.
What render farm service did you use? Sorry if I was out of the room when you covered it.
Oh, I used Conductor. They're like, they usually did big studio stuff, but they've recently opened up a render farm for personal projects and stuff like that. So what was great about them really is that they were a lot of render farms. Like I found it was really hard to ask them questions and contact them. And a lot of times with rendering, like there's so many changes I had to make with my render settings that being able to like talk to them and like email them back and forth every day and be like, this is not working. And they were literally like changing their software for me. Like they were sending me like a beta version of their software. And I was like interacting with them. Like, I need you to like do this because it's not rendering this. So like I use Conductor and they were really helpful with like fixing a lot of technical things, which I didn't realize rendering was going to be so like having so many problems like that. So yeah. Yeah. Don't take no for an answer is my motto for a lot of things.
Jacob, I want to truly congratulate you for intimidating me for my final visual effects project.
We're not going to do anything close to that.
Do it.
I was like, oh no. But it seems like a Herculean task you've taken upon
This
yourself.
was not his first project.
Okay, good
This
to
is
know.
my second project with any VFX stuff at least. So yeah, but no, like I mean, that's what the point I'm saying is like you can limit yourself to whatever you want. You know, you can like do whatever you want. You don't have to. I hope I didn't sound like too pessimistic at the beginning, but it's like you don't have to like do any of the things I did. You can do things your own way. Everyone has their own way of doing things. So, you know, like whatever, how much you want to do is what you can do. So yeah. And if you have any questions about anything, feel free to ask me or something.
Can you send me your PowerPoint?
Yeah, I will send you that. I was really proud of when I laid out the merge operation. I was like, wow, this is like a, yeah. I'm
Next
like,
level. Thanks, Jacob. That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening. Cool.
I'm going to hit you up for advice later on this semester.
Feel free.
Jay wants to give back since he's been bending our ears so much. So
Exactly.
I appreciate it, Jacob. I appreciate it.
Exactly. I reached out to so many people. I will be happy to answer anybody's questions about anything.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you, Jacob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, man.